Welcome to the Open to Hope Show. I'm your host, Dr. Gloria Horsley, with my daughter and co-host,
Dr. Heidi Horsley.
This show is brought to you by the Open to Hope Foundation with a mission of helping people find hope after loss. Well, Heidi, we've got a great show today because I know people are going to love it. You're going to love to hear about grief in the workplace because it's a big issue.
Absolutely, it is, Mom. And we have three guys today that are going to talk about grief in the workplace and what's being done and the do's and don'ts, and give some information out there to people that need it.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, we're happy to have you guys all on today. Fabulous having grief in the workplace. And Heidi, you want to introduce them. But
Absolutely.
First I want to say the interesting thing to me today when I was looking at the show, I always look at the show, the guests, and is that you guys all come to it from a little different perspective. So that's going to make it a really interesting show.
Absolutely, and we've had all of these guests on before, and they're fabulous, and we know them. So let's see. Let me start with Glen, because he's right here next to me. Glen Lord. So he is the founder of the Grief Toolbox, and he is the founder of the International Grief Institute. And Glen and I were on the board of directors for the Compassionate Friends. He was actually our board president. Mm-hmm. So I've known Glen for many years, and he's really involved in grief in the workplace and is rolling something out. Where is it, in Atlanta?
In Atlanta in October, we're going to be doing a thing. And I guess I would clarify a little bit, because it's grief in the workplace is there whether we do anything with it or not.
Right.
What we want to do is help with the managing of the grief in the workplace, because employees are affected whether the employer wants to admit it or not. All of us are affected by it. In fact, 1 out of 50 people are affected with a direct family member being affected in their grief. So that's going to be part of what's happening every year. So if you even have a relatively small company, somebody in your company is going to be affected by it. But how do you manage that? How do you get their productivity back? How do you help them through the process? How do you do what you need to do, because you're a business and you have you need to produce that. But how do you also help them and care for them and bring them back into the fold? And really that's what we want to talk about.
And I love that because Glen comes at this from a kind of a corporate, because before his son Noah died, he was heading off to be in a Fortune 500 company. So he comes at it from this aspect.
Yes.
So Ron, give us Ron.
Our Glen Kelly, also known as Ron, has actually written a book called Grief in the Workplace. Mm-hmm. So he will also talk with us about
grief in the workplace,
right?
And from both sides. The great thing about Glen and I, and I'm sure most of us sitting here, is we have been on both sides of it.
Right.
We've seen it from both sides. The unique angle I think that both of us do, or all three of us do, is I want to come at this from both sides and realize we want to also advocate for the employee, of course, because there are fellow and sister and brother grievers out there. We want to advocate for them, but we also want to recognize that there's a business out there, and businesses are in the business of doing business. They have other responsibilities to all the other employees there, to suppliers and partners and clients and customers. So we want to advocate for both sides. And when we talk about grief in the workplace, we all have this knee-jerk reaction. What else can the employer give? What else can the employer give? What else? As the griever, we have to realize that we're going back to work, and most of the time we're going back, we need the money, we have to go back, but we're also going back.
Right.
So we have to be able to adapt when we go back, not only to our own pains, but to the workplace itself.
Yeah, and Glen comes from the military and from the our Glen, yes.
Fred.
Ron comes from the military perspective and also from the police work perspective.
But then in 97, when my son was born with the hypoplastic left heart syndrome, I left law enforcement and I went to work in the private industry. I went to work for a large defense contractor, and thrown into that world of being an executive without any past experience as an executive, but thrown in there where I was in personnel management, which was wonderful because I got to see that interaction. And many times, long before I even had my experience with John, I got to see what it was like when I lost, or I knew that one of my employees had lost a loved one. And I sat around going, well, I did things, but did I do it right? Did I do enough? Did I do too much? Did I get in the way? So there's another aspect of it too, which is you do have compassionate employers out there, but they don't know if they're doing the right thing. And some of them just need the guidance. You know, yes, you've done the right thing, or no, maybe you should make sure that you make it to the service, make sure that you cater food over to the house, things like that.
And Heidi, Paul I come from the healthcare world, worked in the area in nursing and grief and loss, and one of the things that's always concerned me, particularly you work in hospice areas, is that sometimes we don't take care of our own, right?
I think it's grown over the years, especially with the education of hospice on the National Forum and some shows like yours and the people like here in Glen's, and the awareness of it has grown. But taking the time, I think, being a background of social work and psychotherapy, it's part of our training that you have to have somebody to talk to about supervision or unloading. And I think a lot of professionals don't have exactly the same discipline, but I think creating meaningful rituals and safe times where people can just be aware of, you have to, being professional, yes, but also professional is going to cross into your heart and soul and compassion, and to find the dance and the mingling of how to process that is so vitally important.
So Mom, just to let everyone know, this is Paul Alexander, and he is a singer, songwriter, and psychotherapist, as you can tell. And at the end of our show, he is going to sing the song one more time.
All right, and we're going to talk a little bit about that song before the end of the show, so we can hear you hear about why you wrote it and those kinds of things. So thank you. All right, well, let's get right into it. Delve into it. What is it about grief in the workplace? You know, I'm an employer. I give people a week off.
Well, I want, before we do that, I wanted to comment on something that Paul said, because I think it's larger than the hospice world. One of the things we've been working with is hospitals. And that compassion fatigue, that burnout that happens with it, I think it's really good to look at that world, because honestly, I think that is an exaggerated reality of what happens all the time. So you talk about, you know, we've been working with the hospitals and helping them, whether it be their neonatal wards or their emergency rooms, where death is just a part of life in that world. And how do these people cope with that? Which is the same thing you talk about in the hospice world. And that happens all the time. But reality is, you say, okay, the week came off from there and you got the week off, and that's the part that I think, you know, that when Mom was talking about, that's the part employers do really well. You get to go to the funeral, you get to do that piece. But what happens when the person comes back and they have a little bit of that Swiss cheese brain, and maybe they're not able to accomplish the tasks that they had before, and yet your company still has to get the product out the door, you still have to meet the pieces. How do you both work with them, provide a safe environment for them with that? And one of the things you can do with that is recognize those realities and have honest conversations. We're afraid as employers to have those conversations with people. Oftentimes the conversation goes along the lines of, you know, you're talking to them, you hear that they bereaved, you let people go to the funeral, and then you come back and you kind of want it to kind of disappear. And it's not. It's going to be part of their lives, not just for the next week or the next year, for their lifetime. It's going to be part of who they are. And how do you incorporate that in?
Well, let me ask you, Ron, how do you get employers to change and deal with people?
I hate to say it this way, but 9 times out of 10, the best way to do it is do it with, number one, the truth, but number two, kind of hitting them in the wallet and letting them know. Because they are compassionate out there, but it's also an uncomfortable topic. We can all say that. Grief is, mortality is uncomfortable in itself. It's not often talked about. I can tell you this, in the boardroom and business planning sessions, we don't talk about it. We want to farm it out because we don't want it in the workplace. We want to give it to an employee assistance program or something and hope that Billy's going off to the EAP, and then he's going to do what? He's going to get over it, and he's going to come back and be as productive as he was before, but that's just not the reality behind it. So as an employer, you've got to convince the employers that there are long-range stipulations to this that you're not going to be able to see right off the bat, because part of it's my fault as a bereaved, because I'm going to come back to work and try my best to look like I'm okay in front of you. So we have to put some of the blame back on us as well. We're not doing okay, but we're going to look like we're okay. What's the employer going to think? That we're okay, that we are doing those bad words, getting over it, when we're really not. So in Grief in the Workforce, the program that Glen's doing and I'm doing, you go in there and you teach them, we're not trying to make you a therapist. We're trying to give you awareness and understanding of what goes on. And with that awareness and understanding, you can go a long way to mitigating the adverse impacts of what's going on with me when I return to work.
It's going to save them money. So Paul, tell me, I know you're a therapist too and working in hospice. What if I want to cry at work?
Well,
what do I do?
To find safe, you have to find safe places. I think the more people are compassionate, people like social workers, chaplains reach out. We used to have a weekly meetup with the staff. Now, of course, not everybody wants to talk. You have to respect that. But they know that it's coming, and then they know that you're available in your office. So the more it's open, I think things start mingling out and just knowing who's the safe spot. And what I'm going through is not abnormal. There's nothing wrong with me because I'm suffering. In this case,
nothing wrong. I'm okay.
Okay, Glen, what happens when I'm aware that they're not going to save my job for me? If they say we've got leave.
Too long?
We've got leave.
That's right.
Well, I think that that's a really important part, because you know, Ron talked a little bit about the financial impact, and one of the areas the financial impact hits with businesses is in that turnover. When the employee thinks that they're going to have their job, and that they don't really have their job. They have it in name only. They no longer have the responsibility, or that they've no longer, the pieces aren't there for them, and so they go looking for someplace else. Turnovers are part of our world right now, but the turnover is increased when someone dies, and that affects their world. And so as an employer, I think it's a matter of looking at how do you look to them to say, okay, what are your limitations? I mean, if they're in charge of the safety of the factory right then, maybe you need to modify their job because you can't have other people hurt by it. But at the same point in time, where can you give them responsibilities? If they need to cry, can you provide a safe room for them, a place to say, okay, here's a place you can go if you need to go there, you know, or can you provide them a buddy to say, okay, here's someone that you can go to and talk to and say, okay, I need some help and support today. I need some pieces, someone that they can work together to do that. Because if you do that, that's how the employer is going to get the most out of them. But I like what you're saying too. As an employee, you have to be really willing to have that conversation. But I think that conversation's honesty has to start with the employer. The power situation is where the employer has the power, not the employee. And the employer has to allow for that safe and environment for the employee to have that conversation.
And if I can add on to something that's amazing, but one of the biggest hidden costs that they have, along with turnover, first is absenteeism. The average bereaved person is going to experience at least 30 days, beyond the initial bereavement leave, at least 30 days of additional unscheduled time off. And why is that? Because when the brain is hurting, the brain wants to heal in some place safe and comfortable. And when the workplace is not a safe, comfortable environment for them any longer, then what are they going to do when they wake up one morning and they're hit with a wave of grief? The brain is going to say shelter at home where it's safe and comfortable. So in these employment environments where it is either indifferent or hostile or anti-grief or whatever you want to call it, it's not a comfortable environment. So absenteeism is one of the biggest indirect costs, hidden costs that happen in their workplace, along with turnover. So
Well, I
we've got to make it a safe
think in the
environment.
healthcare field, Paul, it's burnout too. I mean, over and over, dealing with people who've had a loss can be tough.
I think I go with, you mentioned that too. I think now more and more has been done with education, and I think there's more awareness. I had the thought as you were speaking, to be able to get, if it's not going to have the resource in the place where you are, that there's resources given out, and to more than one, not just the EPA, but counselors, support groups. I know people used to call for bereavement groups, and I would go through all the things online. I was like, there's nothing out there.
Right.
So the job of the person reaching, and probably, and I don't know much about grief in the workplace or the oversight of it, but I would think for those in hospice to give more than one resource.
Right, and
To
I
have
think
a
there's a
booklet,
myth out
you know.
there that if you don't say anything and don't talk about it and pretend it never happened, that the employee will do better. When in reality, that's not true, like you're saying. That will lead to absenteeism. That will lead
Well,
to
here's the
feeling-
big thing, and he sort of touched on this, which is great, is the fact that there is support out there.
Yeah.
There's Open to Hope, there's EAPs, there's a lot of support out there. A very small fraction of anyone will ever seek support. However, we spend over 90,000 hours on average as an American employee going to work in our lifetimes. 90,000 hours.
That's
we
amazing.
spend more awake time with our coworkers than we do with our family members at home.
Right.
Where is my biggest influence? Because I'm going to go back to work. Whether you give me 20 days of bereavement leave or whether you give me 3, I'm going to come back to work and I'm still going to be affected by my grief. And now I'm going to be surrounded by peers, supervisors, and subordinates who are my major influencers.
Right.
Major influencers. And yet I walk into an indifferent, uncaring environment.
Ron, are you, do you do online counseling? Did I remember
No,
that?
I
Or
do not.
you don't
No.
do any of that?
No.
But you go into the community. Glenn, how would people find you? I want to make sure we get this.
InternationalGriefInstitute.com would be the
Okay.
best way to find us. is what we
Okay,
do
and
with that.
Ron, how they found you,
My
all your
website.
books. Talk about your books a little bit.
Well, I've got the 3 original bereavement support books for my fellow bereaved out there, but the last book I did is for the employer. It's Grief in the Workplace, and it breaks down some of the ways to mitigate the loss. This one is directed towards the employer and not towards the bereaved employee. There'll be a companion book that follows out with that.
Okay,
first
but
one
I'm
is-
watching the show and I'm not an employer. Now, I want to spend the last half of the show
You're an
telling
employee.
us, I'm an employee.
Okay.
I want to spend the last half getting some tips from all you guys on how I'm going to survive in the workplace.
Yeah. The do's and don'ts.
Yeah?
Well, I think one of the big keys is as an employee, you don't know what you need. And it's really a tough situation, because I caution in saying, I hear what you're saying, I want to put that on the employee, but I want them to forgive themselves. I want them to be compassionate with themselves, and I want them to recognize that as much as, to your point, they have to play a role in this, they also have to, the reality is they are bereaved, they are hurting, they aren't going to do everything that would be best for them to do. But if they're able to, I think the more you can be open and honest with your employer, and in some cases that's just not possible. Because to your point, you got to get a paycheck, and some employers, it's got to be put away, and you've just got to do what you got to do to make your family come together.
That's pretty hard, because you guys are both bereaved parents, and Paul is a bereaved child. His parents have died. And I think this is one thing that's kind of interesting, because there's kind of hidden grief, you know, with bereaved parents, whereas with a child, people have read about it, they've heard about it, there's a shock, there's that kind of thing. At least some people know. But when you've lost a parent, and we have a lot of people come to our website for adults who've lost parents. That's kind of hidden, isn't it, Paul?
I think so. I think the shock of it. Billy Crystal did a whole thing about it, I think after his mom died, about how it really whammied him. And you'd expect that, and I did the same thing when I was working in the hospice with children who were passing. The parents, I met a lot of parents at the time, and it was an education to me, but it opened my heart, and I did my best to be present. But then when my parents died, I felt I did the should. I should be over it in 2 years at least, because I walked the journey with bereaved parents, and I felt I have no right to be grieving this long.
You minimized your own loss.
I did.
Yeah.
But you talk about things that are hidden as well, and we talk about grief in the workplace, and our mind automatically is, the grief in the workplace program I go to, they talk about, number one, well, I didn't lose an employee. And I said, well, that's something we have to talk about too, because your employee is going to have a ripple effect throughout. But what about the loss of a business owner? What does that do to your workforce? The loss of a coworker. What about natural disasters that happen when a hurricane takes out half your facility? What about an employee who's had an unwanted divorce recently, or an employer that didn't get a promotion or was demoted? What about 9/11? Do we all remember where we were at work and the grief that it caused us at work?
Okay, you're at work, this has happened. The biggest things that's ever happened has happened to you. What's your advice to us out there? What did you do for yourself when it happened to you?
When mine
Absolutely.
happened to me?
Work-wise, what did you do for yourself? Give us a couple of tips what we can do.
I went back. Honesty is always the best thing, and I knew that when I went back that I had to be honest with myself, that I didn't know what it was going to be like. I had somebody that was very wise and told me the first thing you have to do is take care of yourself. Don't let anybody else tell you this or that. Go make sure that you're okay, because anybody that's gone through the first initial stages after the loss will realize that, number one, I didn't eat well, I didn't sleep well. I'm going back to work because, from my standpoint, I'm sorry, I needed to control something. When I lost John, I lost control.
And Glen's identifying with that.
I was a boss. I knew I could go back.
I mean, truthfully, it was the one area that I still knew I could be successful.
You could control it.
And I know that you have a song, who am I now? And what I still knew I was is I could do that. I couldn't. When my son died, I didn't know if I could be a dad anymore. You talk about the impact of a loss of a parent. Honestly, right now, my dad is a bigger impact on my life today than my son. He's more recent. Yeah. So it's affected me right now, today. That's a bigger loss in my life than my son. And I think that it's something that when you're doing that, you have to be open with that. And I think the other thing you have to do is look to where it is you need help. Because one of the things I would say is there are certain projects I knew I could do really, really well, and there were team members I knew I could lean on, and there were those who I knew I could lean on. I had the conversation with them and said, I need you to do this for me. And if I could do that, then I could make that happen. But also, like you say, I was working 12, 13-hour days and not even thinking anything of it, because at least I could be successful there.
Yeah.
And I noticed the impact right away when I went back. And a real 30-second thing, real quick. Before my loss, all my managers that worked for me used to stop by my office in the morning, and it got to be, I call it an impromptu meeting. It started out as hello, here's coffee, have a good day, everybody goes their separate way. And I got used to it because I knew what my managers were doing just by their little impromptu stop by. And then I lost John. Yeah. And I went back to work. and nobody stopped by my office
Wow.
anymore.
That's tough.
Yep.
I've heard this before too.
Yeah.
And that,
This
that
is tough.
might not be everybody's business model,
Yes.
but it worked for me because I knew where my managers were
That's
and what they
right.
were doing, and I could say, no, Bobby, don't do that. Let's do this instead.
And all of a sudden they avoided you.
They avoided me
Yep.
That's tough.
because they were uncomfortable. I
Right,
don't hold
of
them in
course.
malice. They didn't do
Right,
it out of malice.
right.
They were just uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Mortality is an uncomfortable time.
Yeah. Paul, what's a tip for you for people? How
I
did you
like
do
what
it?
you said. To find what works for you.
Yeah.
I knew I was going to see my therapist once a week. That worked for me.
Okay.
I had my spiritual meditation groups. That worked for me. I knew it. And that's why I tell everybody, you have to
Find what works.
you have to step out. And it's hard work. You're in grief. You don't want to do it. But find what works for you and be open to surprises of who might be your companion.
And you also
that.
lose friends and you gain friends.
Right.
That's
Sure.
another thing.
Right.
There's good grief support out there for you. Just look around, but don't expect all your friends to be that good grief support or
Yeah.
people at work, because it
And
doesn't
just
always
realize
work
that
that
others
way.
are going to get over your grief long before you do.
Yeah, yeah.
I like that.
I love that. Others are going to get over your grief long before you
Well,
do.
we have to be forgiving of
Great
people. We
point.
do.
Yeah,
They're
yeah.
not going
And you
to
have to
your grief.
decide if you do later on, maybe forgive some people that had insulted you 2 years before or whatever. You know, you just have to decide. Paul, give us the name of your song you're going to sing and a little
thanks.
comment on it.
This is One More Time, and it comes from a spiritual place of a time when I was suffering in my life and wondering where God had gone, and where I felt abandoned, and just my faith struggled with that, and saying, "Come on, one more time, I'm going to open up to my belief that I'm not abandoned, I'm not alone."
Right. Give us your website.
rglenkelly.com. So it's 2 N's in Glen, 2 L's in Kelly, and rglenkelly.com.
InternationalGriefInstitute.com.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for watching this show today. And Heidi and I hope that you will be able to take care of yourself in the workplace and let others know about the show. And we also want to remind you that if you've lost hope, please lean on ours until you find your own. And God bless.
Lost and feeling low, not knowing where to go, running out of steam, with no vision or a dream. I'm frightened, I'm afraid, losing sight of plans I made, wishing on a star, not knowing where you are. One more time, I will trust you. One more time, I will try. I reach out my hand with a prayer in my heart. I am your child. You are my divine. At the end of my rope, I will hold on to the hope. You will see me through. One more time. Stormy winds they blow, toss me to and fro, and like the grains of sand, I'm drifting through the land. And time again, oh, I wonder where I've been. I am trying hard to see the path ahead of me. One more time, I will trust you. One more time, I will try. I reach out my hand with a prayer in my heart. I am your child. You are my divine. At the end of my rope, I'll hold on to the hope. You will see me through. One more time, I come before you. I am down on my knees, I'm crying. I'm crying. One more time, I will trust you. One more time, I will try. Oh, I reach out my hand with a prayer in my heart. I am your child. You are my divine. At the end of my rope, I'm gonna hold on to some hope. You will see me through. You're gonna see me through. You will see me through. One more time. One more time.
You don't need enough hope to get through the day. You don't need enough hope to get through a year. You just need enough hope to get through the next moment.
Even though we had this thing happen to us, it also happened for us.
We hold the memories of those that we cared for, that were a part in the making of our characters. And when they pass, those memories will come back when you need them. They become voices of intuition and of guidance.
We want to be a lifeline for somebody else. We want to inspire others and say, we know what it's like to be where you are, but you're not always going to be there. Just take our hand, believe us. We'll take the journey with you.
When life presents 1,000 reasons to mourn, show life that you have 1,001 reasons to smile.
We get through this one breath at a time. We don't do it a day at a time. That's healing. That's positive, and that's what the world wants to talk about.
People die. Love doesn't die.
We always say, if you've lost hope, please lean on ours.